I'm Alex, 29 years old, and to be completely honest, I've spent most of my life learning to expect very little from my family, not because they're cruel or abusive, but because of that special kind of selfishness that slowly wears you down over the years. You know what I mean. Birthday calls that come a day late, family dinners where you're somehow always the one bringing the drinks or dessert, only to find out they've already eaten without you. I learned early on to laugh it off, to tell myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need much. But this was different. It all started when my sister Clara announced she was hosting a small, fancy birthday dinner for herself at one of those trendy rooftop terraces in central Madrid. Not just any night out. We're talking a fully rented out venue, a string quartet, and all that candlelit nonsense. I got the invitation a week later than everyone else, through a WhatsApp group I suspect I was added to as an afterthought. The message just said, "Guys, so excited to see you next Friday, 8 sharp, rooftop entrance." No details, no mention of food options or dress code, but I knew better than to ask. Every time I tried to clarify something in that group chat, it felt like no one read my messages, as if I were a secondary character in a family comedy I hadn't signed up for. Still, I showed up, put on a blazer, and even bought Clara a set of designer candles she'd been raving about on Instagram. They weren't cheap, about €150, but I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe she'd notice. Maybe someone would pull out a chair and say, "Hey Alex, we saved you a spot." Instead, Clara greeted me at the entrance with a look of surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to actually show up. "Oh, you came," she said, adjusting her clutch. She looked stunning, professionally styled hair, flawless makeup. She gave me one of those quick, awkward hugs, skipping the customary 2 kisses you'd give to someone you barely know. "Well, we didn't count you for the dinner reservation, but I'm sure they have extra napkins or something." I blinked. "Wait, you didn't count me." Clara laughed as if I were the one being difficult. "Well, I thought you might be working or out of town. You've been so disconnected lately. It's a fixed menu. Don't make a big deal out of it." Before I could respond, her husband, Marcos, basically the human equivalent of fine print in a contract, chimed in with his usual passive-aggressive charm. "You should be grateful to be here, kid. There's barely any space." He slapped my back like we were buddies, then pointed to a lone stool tucked in a corner of the terrace, wedged between a dying potted plant and a noisy industrial fan. It wasn't anywhere near the main table. You couldn't even hear the music from there. I just walked over and sat down. No one offered me water. No one came to say hi. I could see them all clinking glasses, laughing at inside jokes I'd never been part of. Clara's best friend, Sophia, gave a loud toast, calling her the most generous, big-hearted woman I know, which felt like a cosmic joke from the universe. Every now and then, someone glanced my way, like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. A waiter finally came by and offered me some bread rolls. That was it. No salad, no main course, no wine, just 3 cold rolls and a napkin. I smiled and nodded, too tired to make a scene. I stared at the gift bag, still unopened, by Clara's chair. I watched her open everyone else's gifts, gold watches, silk robes, a personalized charcuterie board, and I waited, honestly waited, thinking maybe she'd notice mine. Maybe she was saving it for last. She didn't even glance at it. At one point, the wind picked up and nearly knocked it over. Marcos grabbed it and slid it under the table like it was junk. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, staring at Madrid's skyline, pretending the flickering candle on the ledge was more interesting than the feeling of being a ghost. Then they brought out the cake, 3 tiers of chocolate and raspberry with edible gold leaf. Everyone clapped as the lights dimmed and the quartet played some poppy song I didn't recognize. Clara blew out the candles dramatically. Marcos kissed her cheek, and people passed around plates like it was the climax of a cheesy movie. The waiter made his way to my little corner and, to my surprise, left me a slice of cake. But right after, he placed something else beside it, a detailed bill for €3,987. He cleared his throat. "You're listed as a non-associated guest of the main table. Would you like to settle this?" I stared at him. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that maybe he'd confused me with some random guest. But no, my name was printed on it, and the items listed were exactly what Clara and the others had ordered. Premium menus, imported wine, valet service, things I hadn't tasted, things I hadn't even seen. Clara glanced my way, finally noticing the commotion. She raised her eyebrows in mock surprise. "Oh right, we split the bill among those who confirmed. And well, since you didn't confirm, I guess they assumed you were on your own." Her tone was almost bored. I stood up slowly, calmly, the napkin still neatly folded in my lap. I looked at the waiter, then at Marcos, who was suddenly very interested in the view behind me, and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "I wasn't invited, remember." Then I turned to the waiter, pointed directly at Clara and Marcos's table, and added, "They're hosting, they're paying." The music didn't stop, but it felt like it did. Heads turned. Clara's face went from smug to sour in half a second. Marcos opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again. I left the cake untouched and walked out, hands in my pockets. By the time I got to the street, my phone was already lighting up with messages. Clara, Marcos, even my mom, all asking what my problem was, saying I'd embarrassed them, that I'd made a scene. I didn't respond. Instead, I got in my car and drove home, replaying the night in my head, every little slight that had piled up over the years, every forgotten birthday, every last-minute cancellation, every time I was an afterthought. Because this time, I wasn't going to swallow it quietly, and what I did next would make sure they never forgot it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in the dark, the soft hum of the fridge in the background, my mind replaying every second of that dinner like a broken tape. The stool, the napkin, the way Clara had smiled smugly, like I should feel lucky to breathe the same rooftop air as her. But what stuck with me most was Marcos's voice. "You should be grateful to be here." That phrase echoed in my head, carved into my bones. Grateful for what? For being ignored, for getting crumbs at my own sister's celebration, for being turned into the official outsider in a family I'd helped hold together for years. Because here's the part Clara and Marcos conveniently forgot. 2 years ago, when Marcos lost his job during that big tech layoff round, guess who helped them stay afloat? Who paid their rent for 3 months while they got back on their feet? Who loaned Clara money when her car broke down and they didn't want to dip into their wedding savings? Me, quiet, reliable Alex, the drama-free guy with a steady paycheck and a bad habit of saying yes too often. And you know what? I never asked for repayment. I never brought it up at parties or made them feel guilty. I thought family helped each other without keeping score. But that night changed everything. I realized they didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource. So I decided it was time to show them what it felt like when the resource ran dry. The next morning, I pulled a folder from my filing cabinet. Inside were signed agreements, digital receipts, bank transfers, the silent paperwork of the past few years. And right on top was something Clara must have completely forgotten about, my signature as the primary guarantor, notarized on the refinancing of their apartment's mortgage. They couldn't get the loan approved. Marcos's credit history was a mess at the time, so I stepped in, naively thinking it was just a temporary favor. Turns out when your name on the mortgage and you're technically the primary guarantor, you have a bit more power than most people realize. I didn't want to be cruel. I wasn't out for blood, just tired of being stepped on. So I called my lawyer, explained the situation, and asked what my options were. She paused for a moment, then said, "Do you want to get out of this cleanly, or do you want them to notice?" I didn't hesitate. Let's make them notice. That same afternoon, I logged into the bank's portal and flagged the apartment's account for review, citing financial mismanagement and requesting a temporary freeze on refinancing privileges. Then I called the Homeowners Association and reported that any structural renovations done to the property without both owners' approval would violate their bylaws. Finally, I scheduled a meeting with the property manager to review the lease clause, because it turns out they'd been renting out the spare room on Airbnb without my knowledge, and I had every legal right to terminate the short-term sublease agreement. By the end of the week, the ripple effects had begun. Clara texted first, "Hey, is something up with the apartment paperwork? The bank says there's an issue." I didn't respond. Then Marcos, "Dude, can you fix whatever's going on? We're supposed to remodel the kitchen next month." Again, silence. By Friday, Clara called, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Alex, this is getting a bit serious. Can we talk?" I finally replied with a text, 3 words, "Ask your husband." That weekend, I drove to a countryside house in the mountains, a place my family barely remembered because it was Instagram-worthy enough for them. It was quiet, no group chats, no rooftop drama, just pines and silence. And then came the message that made me laugh out loud. "Marcos, bro, are you freezing our accounts out of spite?" As if I hadn't been frozen out for years. On Monday, I sent a formal notice to their mailbox via certified mail, a request to fully refinance the apartment in their names, removing me entirely, or put it up for sale before the quarter ended. Clara called again. This time she didn't bother with a cheery voice. "Are you blowing this out of proportion?" she snapped. "It was just a dinner." "No," I said calmly. "It was every dinner, every birthday, every time you acted like I was a stand-in instead of a person." "Alex, come on," she huffed. "You're not even hurting us, you're just being dramatic." That's when I finally said what I'd been holding back for years. "You used me like a credit card with a pulse, but it never occurred to you to ask what it cost." And I hung up. That should have been the end, but Clara doesn't like losing, especially not publicly. So when emails started trickling to my boss, to mutual friends, subtle things, suggestions that I was unstable, overreacting, that they were worried about my health, I knew exactly where they were coming from. Nothing overt, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. But what she didn't know was that I'd been keeping everything. Every payment receipt, every loan confirmation, every message where she thanked me for bailing them. Chinese letter, the screenshots I was about to send would ensure everyone finally saw what I'd been quietly carrying for years. I didn't drop the nuclear bomb right away. It's tempting when you have a deck full of evidence to just lay it all out and watch the chaos unfold. but I'd spent too many years silent, too many dinners swallowing my pride, watching Clara rewrite history. If this was going to happen, I wanted it to unfold slowly. I wanted people to feel the cracks before they saw the collapse. The first thing I did was send a single email. No attachments, no rant, just a polite, measured message to the small circle of friends and family who'd been CC'd on Clara's little smear campaign. Subject, for transparency's sake. Hello, everyone's. I don't usually address private family matters in group threads, but since concern has been raised about my well-being, I thought it'd be helpful to clarify a few things. Below is a brief summary of my involvement in Clara and Marcos's financial matters over the past 2 years. No commentary, just facts. Then I listed them, clear and simple. Emergency rent transfer, €3,000, June 2022. Car repairs, €1,250, August 2022. Loan to cover wedding vendor cancellations with a signed promissory note, €6,500, October 2022. Guarantor on mortgage refinancing, €17,000, February 2023. Outstanding community and maintenance fees totaling €3,600 to date, 0 repayments. I ended it with a screenshot of the signed refinancing document, clearly showing my name and the clause about mutual decision-making for all structural or financial changes. No closing line, no mic drop, just a little light. Within an hour, 2 people replied privately. One was my cousin Raquel, who I hadn't spoken to in months, apologizing for buying Clara's version. The other was my Aunt Maria, who simply wrote, "I had no idea. That was enough for now." Meanwhile, Clara and Marcos were imploding behind the scenes. I knew because Marcos' LinkedIn profile suddenly changed from strategy director to freelance consultant. I knew because Clara posted a cryptic Instagram story. People show you who they really are when you stop serving their agenda, paired with a betrayal quote and a black and white photo of her wine glass. Classic Clara. What she didn't post, though, was that their bank denied the refinancing request without my approval, or that their Airbnb guests started leaving 1-star reviews when the property manager blocked future bookings, or that the overdue community fees notice had been sent to me, not them, because Marcos hadn't updated the bank details. I forwarded them the notice with a simple message, "This one's on you." No reply. I think they knew I'd stopped playing the fool. But what came next wasn't what I expected. It was Clara blowing up my phone or Marcos banging on my door. It was my mom, the last person I expected to hear from. She called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. On the 4th call, I finally picked up. "Alex," she said, her voice sharp. "What's going on?" "What do you mean?" "I just talked to Clara. She's crying her eyes out. She says you're ruining their lives over a dinner." I almost laughed. "A dinner? That's really what she told you. You're freezing accounts, dragging them through legal messes. What am I supposed to think?" "I expect you to think for yourself," I said, "and maybe ask why your daughter and her husband needed me to co-sign their mortgage in the first place." "Alex, you've always been so dramatic, always playing the victim." There it was, the classic move. Rewrite the story, paint me as the emotional, irrational, ungrateful one. I went quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you remember where I sat at Clara's birthday dinner?" She hesitated. "What?" "I sat on a stool by a fan with no food. I paid for her wedding cake. Want to talk about dramatic?" Silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Maybe if you acted more like family, they'd treat you like it." That broke something in me. I acted like family when I saved them from eviction. I acted like family when I paid for her car repairs so Clara could get to her job interview. I acted like family when I co-signed a mortgage they couldn't get. You just didn't see it because it didn't fit your version of who I'm allowed to be. Alex, I didn't call to argue. You called because your golden girl is finally facing consequences and you need someone to blame. Click. I put my phone face down on the table and stared at the wood grain. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from something closer to grief. That call confirmed what I'd always suspected. I wasn't the problem. I was just inconvenient. By the end of that week, Clara's Instagram was blank. Marcos's consulting gig was gone, and the apartment was headed to the market one way or another. But I wasn't done because, remember that wedding promissory note? Yeah, it wasn't just a casual promise. It was legally binding, and I just filed a claim through a summary procedure. The date for that court summons was the same weekend as Clara's next big event, her baby shower. I didn't plan the timing. The court system set the date, not me. But when I saw the notice arrive in my inbox, stamped and dated for the exact weekend Clara had spent months hyping up for her lavish, boho chic baby shower, I couldn't help but smile wryly. Clara had gone all out, a rented greenhouse for the event, a petting zoo, because apparently llamas are trendy now, imported non-alcoholic cocktails, and an influencer-style photographer specializing in ethereal maternity content. She'd even posted a personalized countdown on social media, 17 days, 16, 15, and on day 12 she was served the summons. According to my cousin Raquel, who was still straddling both sides, Clara opened the envelope in the middle of her mani-pedi appointment. She was sitting in a massage chair, sipping detox water, when the process server tapped her shoulder and handed her the envelope with the court claim, €6,500 plus interest, late fees and legal costs. Apparently, she started yelling about family betrayal, loud enough for the entire spa to hear. I almost wished I'd seen it, but I had no interest in the drama. I just wanted closure, not revenge, not chaos, just acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the imbalance, the favoritism, the quiet erosion of respect over the years. Still, part of me worried. Would she show up to court and fight back? I half expected Marcos to waltz in with some half-baked legal argument, or their mom to show up with a letter about how families shouldn't fight over money. But when the date arrived, it was just me, the judge, and Clara, alone, slouched, looking tired, no ring on her finger. She sat across the courtroom and didn't meet my eyes. The case itself was quick. I had the documentation, bank records, a signed and notarized promissory note. The judge barely glanced at Clara before ruling in my favor, granting me the full amount plus costs. It was over in 15 minutes, and that was the strangest part. After all of it, the years of silence, swallowing resentment, smiling at family dinners like I didn't feel the cold shoulder, justice came fast and quiet. No gavel, no murmuring crowd, just a ruling. And on her face, as she left the courtroom, I didn't see anger, I saw shame. But this story didn't end in a courtroom. It ended 2 months later when the check finally arrived, a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a bank check and a note in Clara's loopy handwriting. I hope this makes us even. I don't know what else to say. I sat with it for a while. I thought about tearing it up, framing it, sending it back with a photo of the stool and napkin from that rooftop dinner. But in the end, I did something that surprised even me. I deposited the check and then donated every cent to a small NGO that helps people struggling with rent and facing eviction, exactly what I'd helped Clara and Marcos avoid. Then I sent her a photo of the donation receipt. No text, no emojis, just the facts. She never replied. Since then, we've barely spoken. I didn't go to the baby shower. I wasn't invited to the gender reveal party, which apparently involved a rented petal swan and a drone. And when the baby was born, I found out on Facebook. But I didn't feel sad because something unexpected happened in the months that followed. My phone stopped ringing with demands. No last-minute calls for moving help. No requests to cover a forgotten bill. No pleas for a quick transfer. The silence for once wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Slowly, without all the weight I'd been carrying, I started to feel lighter. I reconnected with old friends. I took a trip abroad I'd been putting off for years. I bought a second-hand espresso machine I'd always said was too indulgent. And every morning, as I sip my coffee in silence, I think, this is what it feels like to live for yourself. But I did get one more message from Clara, almost a year later, a single email. Subject, thank you. I used to think you were just jealous that you stayed quiet because you had nothing to say. But now I realize you stayed quiet because you were tired of shouting in a room where no one listened. I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I had to say it. I didn't reply because forgiveness doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes it just needs a boundary. And I'd finally built mine, brick by brick, reinforced with silence and dignity. No drama, no revenge posts, no shouting, no burned bridges, just a firm line between who I was then and who I'd become. And on this side of the line, there's no stool.